John Barrett.
Hello,
Moretti.
nice to meet you.
Trudy, nice to meet you.
Enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just keep going, I'll catch up.
He wrote the story of the saboteurs, how their life in Germany, and then when they came to America, and then the subsequent trial. And I thought, this is a great story. I would like to write a play about this.
Okay.
So I wrote to Mr. Rackless. No, I wrote to the Justice Department in Washington. I said, I would like to have the trial transcript of this trial, the United States against the saboteurs.
Right, what becomes the Quirin case in the Supreme
The
Court.
Quirin case, exactly right, exactly. And the Justice Department said, we had it a while ago, but we've lost it. We don't have it anymore.
Oh.
This goes back about 20 years. So then I wrote to Mr. Rackless, and I said, you must have a trial. You must have had access to the trial transcript because you quote from it and so on. I've written to Washington. They don't have it. So he said, I've got it. Come down. I'll show it to you. So my husband and I went down to New York. He lived in the city. And into his basement, and there was the whole trial transcript of this trial. And he said, you can take it. And he said, the only thing I want is when you finish your play, you send me a copy. Well, the play, I wrote the play, it's about the length of 10 plays, and it has to be chopped in. But I do have the trial transcript, and Mr. Rackless died.
Oh my gosh.
So where to return the transcript? Maybe the center at Jamestown would be a good place to.
It was a case that got to the Supreme Court during Jackson's time period, so that's a connection.
That's right, it did. The Supreme Court threw it back into Jackson's court, and they decided. Yeah.
So do you,
It's a
you-
wonderful story. It's a
I
great.
need to learn more about it. I don't know that much about
I'll
it.
send you my play
I
if
live
I
on
ever
Long
finish
Island,
it.
and that's where it started when they came ashore.
That's right. That's right. 4 came ashore in Long Island, 4 came ashore in Florida,
Right. Okay.
and then eventually they were
Well,
all.
let me just put my hand way up in the air as
All
the
right.
president of the Robert Jackson Center that if you find that you need to dispose of the transcript, we would be thrilled.
Good. I will leave them to you or bring them to you sometime or whatever. Good. I'm so glad to know that they will have a good home.
Well, this is Robert, this is all part of the legacy.
Great. And Mr. Rackless will be very happy too.
Oh, isn't that
Yeah,
terrific?
yeah.
How did you end up in Nuremberg, Germany?
All right. After I graduated from college, there were a lot of people asking for help in Washington, and one of them was the Signal Corps. Sounded interesting, so I went to Washington to work for the Signal Corps from 1944 till 1945. I graduated in 44,
Where'd you graduate from?
Smith College,
Smith?
44.
Did you know Mary Jackson?
No, I don't think so. Was she the same class?
She was class of 42.
42. I don't think I knew her. A relation?
Daughter.
Daughter. No, but
Mary Margaret Jackson.
But they were giving exam. A friend of mine called me and she said, they're giving exams for people to go to Germany, to the Nuremberg trials. Why don't you take it? So I went and I took the exams and failed to be an interpreter, but I passed the translator exam. They knew if I had a dictionary I could manage. So I went. About 2 weeks later, I went home, I made out a little will and said goodbye, and 2 weeks later I was on a
What time
plane.
period is this? When are we?
This is now about August, September 1945.
Okay.
And so we went to Nuremberg. We flew, I think, to Paris, and then I think by train to Frankfurt am Main, and then probably by car down to Nuremberg, which was a mess. Nuremberg was a mess. Standing were the courthouse and the Grand Hotel, and very little else. And out in the suburbs more, out maybe half mile, 3/4 of a mile out of town, where it was suburban. Those houses were standing. And a lot of people stayed at the Grand Hotel. Other people like me were billeted in a home that had been taken over from the Germans. But we ate in the Grand Hotel. There was a streetcar, went back and forth. took maybe 20 minutes, and we ate all our meals in the Grand Hotel.
Were you working for the tribunal or for the American prosecution effort?
I think I was working for the American Tribunal. I worked for a Dr. Robert Kempner,
Okay.
who was head of research.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. He's died subsequently. He's no longer. Do you know about Robert Kempner?
Yes.
You know the name,
Yes.
right? I saw Whitney Harris as picture there.
Okay. He's still doing well.
Is he?
Yes.
He won't remember me, but we.
You'd be surprised. He has an amazing memory.
We presented a case together. If you ever see him, you ask him about the French general, because my boss, Dr. Kempner, sent me to Berlin at one point to look through the German Foreign Office files, see if there isn't anything incriminating. And lo and behold, there was something there about a French general who had been shot, who had been killed, being transported from one prison to another, and they said he'd been killed while trying to escape. And they said that it was a lie and that they had murdered him and some stuff. That was all in the documents.
Wow.
And Whitney, he was in the Navy, wasn't he? He was a Navy.
Yes. He was I don't know
What
rank.
in the Navy, right? Because I remember and he was the one that presented the case of the French general. And because I had found the material, I was allowed to sit next to him while he spoke there at the podium.
Oh,
and
well,
I have photos.
I've seen some of those photos of
Have-
Mr. Harris at the podium. So
Have
now
you?
I'll look
Maybe
for you.
look. I saw him in one of the pictures, and I saw Dr. Kempner
Okay.
in one of the photos there. Yeah. So ask me questions. I don't know what you want to know.
Go ahead,
Greg, I don't want to jump on
Jump,
you,
no,
but
jump in.
let's start with Robert Jackson.
Yes. Now, I was asked, had I met him? I'm not sure I even met him. If I did, it was maybe at a reception, hello,
Right.
something like that. That was it.
Right. What did you hear of him? What was your impression of him? And what was the kind of view of him among the people you were talking
Yeah. You know, I really, maybe if I thought about it and, went back to those days, I might have more of an impression. He was way up there, and the lawyers, and we did deal with a lot of lawyers, translators and researchers, because a lot of them didn't know German.
to? Right.
So, but Justice Jackson, no, whom I did know fairly well was Telford Taylor,
Okay.
who was also died,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
unfortunately, but wrote a great book.
Why did you say
He wrote a
unfortunate?
great book,
Right.
Telford Taylor, on the Nuremberg trials, a lot of information on the trial. No, I have not much of an impression.
Did you
I'm
get to
sorry
s-
to say, yeah.
Did you get to see Jackson in court at all?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I
Okay.
did. Yeah, yeah.
And do you have impressions or memories of that?
Not much. It was more the things that came out from the German side that was the startling and eye-catching things. Yeah.
Were you in the trial at all when, for example, they showed the movies?
Of the concentration
Yeah.
camps, and some of it. We did not. Well, maybe we did once in a while have deadlines, but if there was something interesting going on, we could get a pass to go in. There were always some seats there, and we could go in for an hour, half hour, if we wanted to.
What was your impression of seeing seeing the concentration camp movies?
It was awful, and that was horrible. But even day-to-day life, you walk from the streetcar to the hotel or the streetcar to the courthouse, and there were the Germans, in the street, in the dirt, fishing for cigarette butts and things like that. It was, and then there was rubble, shoveling rubble into a wheelbarrow with a shovel. These mountains of rubble, it was the whole, even just the living was very discouraging and hard to.
Now, you were in the translation part of this, right?
And research, yeah.
So the
Research.
documents that were in German,
Right. documents that were in German that had to be translated. I worked for one lawyer, Zetterberg, something like that. Now, were all the lawyers prosecutors or not? Were the prosecutors just the ones that went into the courtroom? You say you were...
I'm not sure what their designations
You're
were
going-
then.
You're going to have a surviving Nuremberg prosecutors get-together. Were all the lawyers that were there prosecutors?
Those tend to be the more senior lawyers who got into the courtroom.
That were the prosecutors,
Right.
the other two. All right, I would say then I worked more than for the lawyers. One of them...
Well, but the whole effort was a prosecution team. So I
Right.
think
Oh,
it's fair,
yes.
I think it's fair for them all
To be
refer to themselves as
as prosecutor.
part of the prosecution.
Right.
So
Any-
they would give you directions saying, we'd like you to take this German
Go
document.
go to what's it, Rothenburg, or go someplace. Look in the library. Get some issues of the Streicher's Stürmer, der Stürmer.
Right?
Maybe they'd tell me exactly which issues they were interested in and translate them and bring it back. Bring
It'll
back.
be ultimately may end up being as evidence.
Right.
Did you-
Assignments like that.
When you were preparing, for example, der Stürmer,
Stürmer.
I
Der
didn't have a
Stürmer.
good German accent. You
I
do.
think der Stürmer it was called, yeah.
and that's Julius Streicher.
Julius Streicher.
When after you translated and you maybe went back to the courtroom and you saw
Went-
Julius Streicher,
Went back to the lawyer and gave him the material. Yeah, but yeah,
tell me what your impressions were. You sat there and you had a chance to see some of these
that's
defendants.
right. That's right.
So you close your eyes.
Well, some of them were horrible just to look at. I mean, some of them, Streicher, I think he looked his part. He really looked it. Some of them were rather good-looking men. You know, you wouldn't think.
Close your eyes and tell me about Hermann Goering.
Goering was charming. He was fat. He looked very well fed. You know, you just thought, here, everybody was starving, but not Hermann Goering. Yeah, and then in the end, he outwitted the Americans, didn't he? With his pill that he somehow got brought in. You didn't get the impression of horror with Goering. No. His impression was not that. He surely was involved in all sorts of awful things, but
Rudolf Hess.
Hess was. He was ambiguous. He's in my play. He's very interested in geopolitics and Haushofer and things like that. And he was instrumental in Hess. Hess helped one of the defendants in the Suboter trial, Berger was one of the 8. And Berger spent a year in the jail of the Gestapo in Berlin because he'd been sent to, I think it was Poland or Czechoslovakia, I forget which, and had reported back through his office how badly, I think it was the Poles, were being treated. And that got back to the party, and he was arrested and put in jail for a year. But he had been a student of Haushofer, and Haushofer and Hess were friendly. And somehow Berger got out of jail. That's all in this, also in this They Came to Kill E.B. Rackless book, which is very interesting if you want to read an interesting book about the spies. But anyway, so where were we? Hess. You know, he hadn't been there. He had been there in the beginning. And in the beginning, you know, in the very beginning, when they were, you know, they had hats and a little bit of parts of uniforms, and they marched, and they had songs, and they were going to make everything right, because things were terrible in Germany. I mean, there was a terrible inflation. Times were not good. And here was this Hitler maniac who was going to promise everything wonderful. Everything was going to change now. And a lot of people believed him, and they got in line and they marched. And I think Hess was sort of like that. And then then he went over to England, and I don't know what happened there, and he sat out the war. And he really, I think, suffered a whole lot because he was in that jail until he was 90, alone, right? Solitary confinement till he was 90-some years old. I think he suffered maybe more than a lot of them there, anyway.
What about Albert Speer?
You know, I can't really say. To look at him, he was nice and presentable. He was an architect. It's only after the trial, and I read more, that I became aware, although it did come up during the trial, but somehow I wasn't so aware of it, that he was running those factories, and that was the slave labor, and he very well knew, but I think pretended not to know anything. That was more afterwards I learned all that. Yeah.
Did you, anybody of that front row of defendants, you look at him and kind of jump out and say, boy, that's a scary looking guy? Did the Ribbentrops, did the Keitels?
No, Ribbentrop, all right, and Keitel and Yodel, and I think Streicher, if I could see them in front of me now, if I had a picture, I could probably get that and that one and that one.
Kaltenbrunner?
Maybe Kaltenbrunner. I would have to go through the pictures now. I don't remember so well.
You had a chance to spend some time with Telford Taylor?
Yeah.
What did he think of Jackson?
We didn't talk about it.
Didn't talk about
What
But
was he
I'm
like?
sure he was with him, I think, in the summer and right along building the whole case, so I'm sure he respected Henry and thought he was great. Yeah.
And you admired Taylor?
Very much, yeah. I liked him very much.
Did you stay after the international trial?
I stayed till January 45, 46, 47.
Okay.
So a little bit, just a little bit. And Telford Taylor asked me to stay on through these other trials. And I did for a little bit, but then I wanted to go home. It was enough. It was more than a year. And yeah, it's time to go home.
What's the story we haven't even asked you about? You'd say, man, I wish those guys would ask about X, about your experience at Nuremberg.
I don't know. Except that moment of triumph when Whitney Harris and I presented the case of the assassinated French general. That was very exciting. Yeah.
Now, you advanced the case. Tell me a bit more about it. Maybe you did. Did you talk about it?
Yeah, she uncovered the document. I don't
That's
mean
right.
to
Up in,
steal your
in
story.
Berlin.
And it basically showed a trumped up case against a French general.
French general who was being moved from one prison to another and was assassinated, but the story was let out that he had tried to escape and was killed while trying to escape. But it was all in the documents that this was trumped up, this excuse and so on. So it was a very good case.
Yeah.
And evidently Hitler knew about it. Of course, Hitler wasn't there on trial, but it went all the way up to Hitler, who knew that this had happened and was going to happen.
Whitney Harris will certainly remember this.
You think he'll remember that? All right, good.
He's in good shape.
That's great. I'm glad to hear
He's
that.
actually been interested in coming out to this region to do something.
Well, is he going to come to that reunion of the prosecutors?
That's the hope. Yes.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
This goes back about 6-7 years. A friend of mine was taking a course with Telford Taylor in constitutional law at Columbia and asked me to come. And after that, he said they had just had a reunion, a 50th reunion,
Right, that
50,
would've been
50th reunion
1985, right.
of all the people at Nuremberg. He said, if I'd known where you were, I would have let you know.
Yeah.
But
So
No.
let me ask you a couple of
Yeah.
other people. I mean, more junior people. Did you know Jackson's son, Bill Jackson?
no,
Okay. Or Elsie Douglas, who was his secretary? Did you know?
no.
Okay. Richard Sonnenfeld, he was an interpreter.
That sounds familiar. Sonnenfeld. But I can't place right now.
Roger Barrett, he was a young assistant to Jackson.
No.
Okay. Those are some of those are still around.
Mhm.
I'll throw in a few more. Henry King, or Theodore Fenstermacher.
I heard you mention him, but I don't remember him.
These are just some folks who are still around with us that we are in the process of.
He's
inviting-
in the area.
Well, they're alive.
Alive.
Bernie Meltzer.
Yes. Who?
Bernard Meltzer.
Now that sounds very familiar. Meltzer. Seligman? Is that,
I know the name.
you know the name?
Right.
Yeah, I was friendly with him. I knew him quite well. Yeah.
What about the judges? Did you have an impression of the bench?
Of the bench.
How the court was doing?
Well, the Englishman made a good impression, the English judge.
Lawrence.
Lawrence, right. And I was friendly with the clerk of the French judge, but I knew he had a good clerk. That's all I knew about the French judge.
This is terrific.
I have a lot of pictures
Do you?
from, well, not a lot, but maybe half dozen, 8 photographs of the trial. You know, maybe.
Photographs you were able to take yourself?
No, you know, the photographers
Okay.
took them, and
Right.
and then you could pick them out and you could buy them or
Right,
order them or
right.
whatever. And I have documents. I have some material. You know what? We come to Chautauqua every year. We've been coming for 20 years, my husband and I and friends and so on. Always recently been staying at the Gleason. Maybe on our way to or from Chautauqua next year, it's usually the last week in July, first in August, somewhere like that, I could bring these things and you can make copies, or I'll show you at least what I've got.
Oh, wow.
Would you be interested in that, really?
Oh, absolutely.
Even if there's nothing about Justice Jackson particularly.
No, the proceedings, the whole thing is very interesting.
Just keep in mind, though Jackson was the chief prosecutor, I mean, obviously, the whole prosecution team, of which you're a part, is very important.
Right,
Tells
right,
the story.
right, true.
Do you have things that, did you keep a diary or did you write some letters home that you've been able to
Oh, I'm sure I wrote letters home.
collect?
Yeah, I could. They're up in the attic. I'm sure I could find some of those.
So
Yeah.
those kinds of things are, are wonderful
Right.
artifacts, and they're great memory joggers too.
If we can do that, stop and or even come by from Chautauqua one day with these things. What shall I do? Shall I let you know when we're coming or when
Yeah,
we're
let me know,
here?
and I'm the
Have you
guy
got
in
a
Jamestown.
card or?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. I've been handing them out like a croupier at
Oh,
Las Vegas. I've got one.
because I'm so glad they're in a in a drawer and.
Right, thank you. Yeah, here's both my home phone. Ironic. Here's my home number.
Okay,
But we would be thrilled,
really.
absolutely thrilled,